Welcome to Awakened Motherhood, the podcast where mothers share their powerful stories of healing and empowerment. I am your host, Amanda Quick, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and advocate. In each episode, we dive deep into the stories of mothers who have overcome adversity, found their fierce feminine power, and embraced transformative parenting. Whether you're a mother driven to fight for your children or someone with a story burning inside you, this podcast is for you. Together, we'll explore themes of resilience, self-trust, and healing from our traumatic experiences, all spotlighting the profound journeys of awakened mothers. Join us for a space of naked authenticity, deep inspiration, and genuine connection. Embrace the divine feminine and discover your own warrior mama within. Welcome to Awakened Motherhood, where your story is the spark for change. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Awakened Motherhood. I'm your host, Amanda Quick, and today I'm really excited to introduce my guest, Alyssa Rose. She is a grief guide and death doula, and she is in Portland, Oregon, and she works with the families and communities in her area, specifically around the various grief practices and all of things. So I'm really excited to dig in. She had a whole long bio, but I've decided I'm just going to let her tell you the story.
Sounds great.
Rather than me. And I'm really kind of excited to dig in. I mean, my listeners know I lost my mom last year, so it's something really close to me right now. And I actually had a good friend remind me yesterday. She's like, Amanda, it's not even been a year. It's not even been a year, and you need to give yourself some space and time because you're still grieving. And it really didn't hit me until she said that. So it's very timely conversation.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, grief is such a lifelong relationship, and there can be so much pressure for it to be in some version of a time frame. And I find that never to really be the way of grief. But I'm Alyssa Rose. I am an end-of-life doula, life transitions doula. It started kind of as a death doula, but really there's so many life transitions where the grief shows up. So in my work with hospice, in my work at the end of life, I became really aware of grief and our kind of neglect and avoidance of grief and the impact that avoiding grief has on the quality of life, the quality of care, and the quality of connection that people who are grieving have access to. When their people can't connect or won't connect or are too afraid to lean in and say anything because they don't want to make it worse, it can feel really, really isolating. And then you add on top of that a lot of pressure to be happy, a lot of pressure to not be a bummer when you're hanging out with friends. And so we've kind of made something that I feel is a potential piece to the puzzle of belonging. We've totally pushed it aside and put it behind closed doors. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be talking about this with you and to be connecting more with your listeners as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just exactly stated in so many ways the journey that I've been walking through and still walking through. And, when people leave your lives, whether even if it's because you chose that, or if because they passed over, there is a huge amount of grief and change, and it can be incredibly isolating. So I deeply relate to what you're saying. I am actively working through having more grace for myself through that process instead of all the things I should be doing. But I would love to kind of walk through your journey and kind of start wherever the story for you begins about where this work started and how you got into this place.
Yeah. I feel like there were seeds planted kind of for a long time. And I grew up in a medical, in a household. My dad was a doctor, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. But I didn't want to do medicine in the way that I saw the system do medicine and teach medicine. I was like, that does not make sense for me. So I went a different direction. I went to art school and kind of went down the path there, but was always really interested in humans and the body and healing. And I ended up being really involved in the dying process of my grandmother and of a beloved's grandmother, and it was happening in a similar time frame. Both of these women were kind of walking towards the end of their lives, and they were very similar, and the situations were very similar socioeconomic wise, and but the dying process was so different for these two women, and it was really eye-opening. Just both the person's perspective of like, it's my time, I'm ready when it's my time, and I'm so grateful, versus like a lot of fear and like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not gonna lay down in this hospital bed. I don't wanna die in a hospital. So the person approaching death, but then so vividly the care team, the
Mm-hmm.
family, and the family's ability to be honest about
Mm-hmm.
the prognosis and to be present and to be able to sit there in presence and not try to get her to eat or try to adjust the pillows or try to fix anything, but how can we just know that actually our medicine is presence in so many situations. So that was a really big moment for me that like kind of got all of my alarms going, I guess, and alert up and curiosity peaked. And from the hospital, I called my dad and was like, "Why is our doctor so bad at this? Why are we so bad at dying as a culture?" And so we started a journey in a book club around like reading Being Mortal and understanding like how dying became medicalized. And to me, there was always this kind of underlying thread of grief. So it took me a while to like really center it. Um, it took me years of being at the bedside as a hospice massage therapist and volunteer before and like continually witnessing the dying person and their people and how we were talking about death and how we were talking about what was happening um before I was really like, oh, we're sick around grief. And it was during COVID that I was like,
Mm.
I need other people in this space. I don't know anything about grief. I don't have traditions or rituals I grew up with, but I know I need other people. And so I started these death salons that were happening monthly online. And they were places that were designed to be like a living room instead of a classroom, but bring in art and music and conversation around death and around grief, which grew and continued through the pandemic until things opened up. And then I started hosting in person. And now I do a lot of one-to-one grief work and a lot of community grief ritual work, as well as retreats, and some online virtual villages as well. And it's so beautiful to get to walk with people in and watch their relationship with grief mold and transform and grow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, just even just listening to you, and I relate on so many levels. As just literally having done this in a different way, and it kind of as you were talking, it was really reminding me that the like dying process starts long before somebody even has a prognosis, right?
Mhm.
And we certainly don't talk about it that way,
Mm-mm.
but it starts long before. I was really remembering like my mom actually started doing some of her own end of life work for others. And she was just getting into it. And then she got her own terminal diagnosis. It was almost like some part of her was preparing
Mhm.
herself. And the teacher she had been working with does a bunch of like death work and end of life work and buries and green burials and things of that sort. And she wanted to like get involved with it. And in some ways she did, just not quite how I think she planned,
Yeah.
at least in her logical mind. And, I'm different than my family.
I
And
get
so
that.
I'm different in the way that I look at the world. And so when she got cancer and then she got better, but then when she got it worse again, I could see very clearly this was the choice she was making. And it wasn't in right or wrong. It wasn't in good or bad. It was you're choosing, and that's okay, but let's be honest about it. Let's be honest about where we are. And one of the very last conversations that I had with her before she went into hospice was over the phone. It was like a couple-hour conversation where I said, I think it's time to tell the truth, Mom.
Mm.
like, it's time to tell the truth about where you are. And she says, I haven't been honest. And I said, I know. That's why we're having this conversation. She says, I've been saying the C word. Like, cancer was the C word. She couldn't even say out loud that this is what was happening in her body, because I was just having a health incident. She was just like completely bypassing, not feeling, not going in, not looking at it because it was so scary. And doing all the things on the surface. Like, she made healing from cancer her full-time 80-hour-a-week job. Hiring all the people, doing all of the things, totally trying to control her outcome while also not experiencing all of this. And I watched it play out. And I watched it play out. I could see the choices she was making, and like unconsciously. And this conversation where I said, like, it's time to tell the truth. She told me, I think this is like the most important conversation of my life. And the very next day, she had a pulmonary embolism, disassociated from her body. And I went, that's the truth. It was time to tell the truth. And now she is. And so I flew out there and spent the next 3 weeks supporting her in hospice. And I could see the entire time, like, I knew I was going to bury her. I knew that even though she walked out of the hospital from the pulmonary embolism when I was in the airplane, I knew what I was going to do, even though nobody else in my family did. And it's a lot to hold. It's a lot to hold for people to come to this place where they can lovingly accept and be full witnesses to somebody's experience while also having all of their own feelings through that process. And, you know, me being there did help in a lot of ways, because I really made sure that I was holding the space for her. And so it was a lot of conversations around what she needs instead of what we're supposed to be doing, and all of the things around that. And I know that was really helpful for my family, as like my sister, she was even able to say while my mom was in hospice how frustrated she was at her, right? Because we can have feelings that come up as somebody's leaving about the things that happened 20, 30 years ago or whatever. It can be very complex. And I said after that, I realized I had essentially midwifed her death journey. And yet I'm her oldest daughter. So now after that, after she's passed over, now it's like my process to go through whatever that was, because I was the one by her bed when she passed. I was the only one there during that moment. And she came up from a comatose state, looked me straight in the eyes, and took her last breath. Like, it was very the transmission in itself. And I think we just don't talk about that. We don't, it's too morbid, too icky, too, I don't know. And we need to talk about it.
Absolutely. And something, wow.
I'm sorry.
First
I
of all,
totally just like unloaded all
powerful. So powerful. I'm so grateful to hear this story and to hold this story, and that you were able and willing, made changes in your life so that you could be there and be with her through this.
Yeah, I mean, it was its own thing for me. I knew that it was. I knew that it was activation for me in a different way. And this like womb to tomb journey with my mom in so many ways, because she and I were so deeply connected. Like we were the ones who repeated the patterns. Like I lived her life unconsciously. Right. So we have such a deep connection and understanding of the patterns we held, the lessons we learned, and we had healed so much of our relationship in the last few years. And so I knew it needed to be me to be there. I knew that I was called there for that purpose. And I knew, and I know there's still more that I don't know. That is.
Totally. Well, and there's so much that you touch on that I want to keep pulling the threads of. I mean, you said that, we're saying goodbye much before the last breath, much before someone's on hospice. Our whole life is this tension of saying hello and meeting and say goodbye and farewell, right? So this tension is ongoing. So I think about that a lot of like, I am saying hello and goodbye. I am meeting my daughter. She's emerging. She's 15 months old. And I'm emerging as a mother. And we're saying hello, really getting to know each other more and more. But there's also goodbye in that. And so that's like one of the pieces. I also think a piece that we touched on is that like your mom kind of starting to lean into hospice work or death work. I've
Yes.
noticed that there like I used to be like, come on, everyone needs to talk about death. Why are people avoiding it? And then and I was studying it so deep, and I was able to become a little bit more humble and be like, wow, actually people who are avoiding it and people who are rigorously studying it are responding to the same fear of death, right? It's like I'm
Correct.
trying to get control
Correct.
and others are trying to just
Correct.
not have to engage, right? Or whatever it looks like for people. But so that I find very leveling and very humbling. And the other piece is like how we die is a part of our legacy. So
Yes.
like you getting to be with your mom through that and choosing to be with her through that is so much of what you carry forward as a human, with stories, with lessons, with
Yes.
a way of understanding life and death that is unique to you and her and your family,
Yes.
that has a different kind of ripple effect than any other person's story might.
100%. I mean, the full moon will always now represent her passing because she died 2 hours before the peak of the full moon. We buried her on the next full moon, which would have been her 74th birthday. And it was like, I just knew that pull, that little gravitational pull. And she was so tied to the ocean and the tides. And so just all of the things, like that's her, right?
Mm.
So now every full moon, I feel her in a
Mhm.
different way, and she's present in a different way. And our female bodies are connected to the
Mm.
cycles of the moon. So it's a continual presence there.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you speak to that because though when we hear the word grief, we often think physical death, which it is true that grief is connected to physical death, but also grief is connected to like all change. And I
Yes.
really think that I really, really think that grief is also, I believe that grief is a continued expression of our love
Yes.
and our longing.
Yes.
It's how you continue to say, I love you. It's just that the way we say, I love you, and we receive, I love you, and we be in communication with what we've been separated from changes. But like you have these other ways now to tap in and
Yeah.
connect with your mom.
Yeah. I heard something once that really resonated that, when somebody passes over and, the grieving process continues for their loved ones, that every time they have this like wave of sadness, it's actually usually because they feel the presence of their loved one and they're now associating their presence with the loss. And so they feel grief when they're actually being present. We just don't have the physical form to communicate with. And so the grief is actually a beautiful thing because they're there. You have something to feel.
And yes, and that presence and that connection with them. Thank you
Yeah.
for speaking to that. Yeah, when it comes to grief, there are like so many different forms, and some of them are surfacing as we talk already. And one is the grief that is connected with impermanence, that everything we love will be separated from or it will change form. And so then how do I love fully knowing that it's going to change or we're going to be separated from each other or lose each other in some way? What does that mean about how I show up in love? What does that mean about how I live my life? And that's like such an active call for us individually, right?
Yes, exactly. It is. And I mean, I'm somebody who I live in the state of change. I have changed and rebirthed myself countless times at this point. And I'm a life path 5. I'm literally life and change that's actually more comfortable for me than stillness,
Mhm.
which is its own lesson, I'm sure. But at the same time, every moment of it, as parts of me die and those identities die, and the change that I am, it doesn't mean there isn't grief both from the people around me in the like projections of the old versions of me, right? All of that happens as we're talking about your 15-month-old daughter. I have a 15-year-old son who feels like there's more goodbyes than hellos some days. And as that evolves, because my boys are turning into teenagers, and it's a whole different set of things now where they have their own minds, and that's beautiful, and I have raised them in that way. But at some point, that means unless needed.
Absolutely.
Right?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I have, as a mom who is like so like close with her day to day right now, I feel like I have been just in the last few months, I feel like I've been grieving her getting words because I love all of the different sounds that she makes. And I'm afraid that when she starts speaking words, I'm going to lose my capacity to hear like the subtleties of all those different sounds.
I promise you won't. I promise you won't. And these skills are even more needed when they turn into teenagers because the words no longer are congruent with the energy. And so they say, "I'm fine, Mom." Sure you are. Right.
Yeah.
But I can't use the words anymore to discern all the time. I really have to lean like back into the time you didn't have words to go, what is going under the surface? And so it changes, yes.
Yeah.
But it's perhaps, it never stops being important. And at some point it gets more important. And, there are definitely moments where I have to really lean into what do they really need? Where does the space and environment I need to create? How do I need to move? And none of that has words attached to it. So it's all those knowings.
Yeah.
And at the same time, at some point, they won't be in my home. So I don't believe that changes either. Just as my mom not here doesn't mean we're connected.
Absolutely.
It just looks different.
It looks different. That's the thing. And that's the thing I talk a lot about with people around grief. It's a form change. The connection is still there.
Yes.
It's a form change of how we connect. And that can be really challenging and uncomfortable, but it can also be really creative and connective. I do a lot of grief ritual work, both in communities, but one-to-one with people of like, what does it look like for you to make time in your day or your week where you have intentional space for you to connect with your person, or maybe it's with a dream that you had that has died, or maybe it's with a beloved animal or whomever it might be, or whichever part of you it might be where there's grief. But that could look like so many different ways, as simple as, having a mini little altar in your house, bedside table or windowsill where you have candles or an incense or something that maybe smells nice, or photos, or even objects that make us think of the person. In this case, I'll speak to a person. Objects that make us remember them, or their photos. Sometimes we will make collective altars and we'll put things that they loved when they had a body, right? Like my grandma loved to drink tea, so I pour her a cup of tea here. Or my mom used to love this flower, so I planted it and I have my coffee with her in the garden in the morning where that flower lives. I think there's so many ways to connect. And I also sometimes think like we get to continue being embodied and have access to the sensory experience of being a human. So how can I engage in ways that connect me to or honor an ancestor? Like whether it's a dish from my culture that they used to make or that they used to love eating, can I enjoy that and like let my enjoyment of that be something that is enriching of my life and connecting to this person? Because so often when we're grieving or we're sad that a person, in this case again, has died, like so much of the sadness is connected to the beauty and the gratitude for what life or for what that relationship has been, or our dream of what it could also be.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me, there wasn't so much the like future dream, because you eventually do expect your parents to pass over, right? Like there's no belief that they live forever. But the relationship that we had created after, I was a very tough teenager, and I walked out at 17, didn't talk to her for a very long time, and we repaired, and I'm not even really repaired is the right word, because I relived so much of what she walked through that I gained such a deep understanding and empathy for
the choices that she had with me, and we were able to talk about it in a different way. And so it was more this deeper understanding on a really different level that opened up so much healing, really, for both of us, because I was the lesson that she had to learn how to let go, as I was her daughter who said, I'm doing whatever the hell I want, whether you like it or not. And I got to learn what I was, pushing so hard against, as it hit me in the face in a different way. And for me, I think the part that's hardest to let go of is that she was the only person in my really entire life that truly saw me, like me in my entirety. And it's interesting because it's something that I do naturally for so many people. I see them in their darkness and in their places, but so rarely do I find somebody that can see me. And pieces, sure, projections and the piece that they're comfortable with. But at least with my mom, she saw all of me. And there was that knowing that I always had that. And it's definitely probably the hardest part for me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And yeah. Thanks for sharing more. What was her name?
And it's she went by Joy. Later in life, she was originally Susie, but in her 60s, she changed her name to Joy. She decided she wanted more joy in her life. So what better way than to change her name? And there's so many things that remind me of her, and all the time. I mean, people say I look like her, and just constantly.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's not that I still feel that, I still communicate, I still, like, all of that is there. But she can't see me in the physical, really, in the same way. And the day-to-day, and, when I want to pick up my phone and talk to somebody, I can't do that. And so I can write a journal entry to her. I can feel, I can do all of that. But the isolation, it adds to it, because I'm not talking to people. I'm not going out there. And so it just kind of like exasperates that wound in a sense.
Definitely. Yes. And I'm glad that you're having the experience of isolation, but I am glad that you bring that up here, because it's such a common experience for grievers, that there's deeper wounds. There's more wounds that happen when we are already in a space of grief around a disconnection, a break in connection, that's causing the grief. And then on top of that, you're supposed to do it a certain way and in a certain time, and like it's supposed to be clean and kind of bundled up and over there. Whereas like I really, really believe that grief and community grief tending is a practice of belonging that is really missing from our culture, modern Western culture. And without it, we find ourselves in this epidemic of loneliness. It's not the only cause of that, but it's a really deep one, I believe. And so when we can grow as a culture in our grief literacy, and like, how do we show up for each other when we're grieving? How do I ask for support? And what is it that I need? And how do I ask for that when I'm grieving?
That's a big one, because I don't know. I'm not somebody who historically is very good at asking for help. So I don't even know what help I'm asking for.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, what do you need? Oh.
Totally. Yes. Which can be a really common experience. And there can be pressure to like know what you need, and it's okay to not know what you need. It's okay to try some different things, or be like, can we try this thing? I don't really know, but I think maybe, or I wonder if this could be supportive. But it's really hard when we're in it and we're deep already in grief. So it can be helpful for those who are not in acute hot grief to think about that for themselves. Even I think about it with trauma responses too, of like, what is it that I need when I am dysregulated to come back into regulation? And creating a list for ourselves when we are in a regulated space to support us later. And same with grief. Like, what do I need when I am overwhelmed with grief or sad, or the sadness, rage, frustration that are associated with grief? Like, what is it that I need so I can kind of turn to that?
What are some things that people find helpful? I'm genuinely curious because I don't even have any ideas.
Totally. So in the community grief circles that I host, we always do some like larger group things, but we also do small group things. And the small group is where I feel like we're practicing and we can take a lot of the tools that we're practicing and the exercises out into our own worlds in our own relationships. So one very simple practice is what we call triads, which is simply getting in a group of 3 and one person is speaking, the other 2 are only listening, and the listeners will never respond. They are never going to respond to anything the speaker says. And each person has 10 whole minutes. So the speaker has 10 minutes to just be curious about what is present in their heart and to just speak and share. It's not a presentation. It's not pre-prepared. They're just sharing, and they are having 2 people listen without responding, without trying to fix it, without trying to make them feel better. And that is that space for the speaker to be like, oh, what else is here? Oh, what else is here? Without someone interjecting, even with support, has been able to like surface so much more. And then the really cool and sometimes surprising piece for the listeners, they are like, oh my gosh, it was such a gift to know that I wasn't going to have to, like, I wasn't going to be on the hook to try to make them feel better, or that they didn't actually need anything from me except that I am present and with them. And so then at that 10-minute mark, we switch to the next speaker and there's no dialogue. And that is something we can take home with us, and we can say, we can call a friend and say, do you have 10 minutes? I can handle this I can handle all of my emotions. I don't need you to fix or change or like try to make me feel better. I don't actually even want that. I just want you to be present with me while I feel this. Do you have capacity right now for that?
Yeah, you're really speaking to something that's been coming up for me in even the process of alchemizing shame, that being able to be witnessed in whatever those are. And that can be the grief, that can be the shame, that can be the judgment, that can be all the stuff that we don't want to always feel or that we really struggle to share with others. And they either want to fix it or they want to, whatever it is, but even just being able to really witness it, and it doesn't need fixing. It just needs to be witnessed in love and presence,
and have space.
And have that space, right? Because so many times people are like, okay, what do I need to do? And it's nothing needs to be done.
Absolutely,
but there is so much value in that space to be held through your own uncovering. Right? It's allowing somebody else to almost just be this space that kind of mirrors a little bit. So you start to feel this reflection of what you're putting out there. And I always have looked at the opportunity to do that as an honor. Being able to really feel that that the sacred witness place for people in their dark places. And my journey has taken me not just in the loss of my mom, but in some other very dark places. And so I hold up the capacity to witness others there without my own emotions. And I really feel like that's such a beautiful thing that has come through this. And I think you're kind of speaking to the importance of it in the grieving process as well.
Yeah, that sacred witness piece. I work with a lot of people who have therapists or have worked with therapists, and they're like, hey, I know that you're not a therapist, and I don't want, like, I have that type of support. The support of like, let's try to understand this pattern and where it comes from and how I can work with this and how I can show up better and differently in my life, right? And I'm having now clients come saying, hey, I'm grieving and I know this isn't something to try and fix. And I'm wanting to work together because I want space to feel this all the way through, which I think is so important, to be able to make the spaces to feel it all the way through, because otherwise it will come out sideways the rest of our lives. It can really have physical and emotional symptoms when not tended.
And that to me was the root what trauma is when we abandon the feelings and who we are for some other reason. And that can happen through grief. It can happen through experiences. It can happen through all of it. And we store it, and it turns into illness. It stores into mental health. It stores into all kinds of things. But if we allow ourselves the space to feel it and to move it and to be where we are, then it doesn't fester. And that's such a big, important piece, regardless of what the emotion is.
Yeah. And I really have felt that untended grief has very similar impact and results on our lives as unhealed trauma.
Yeah.
It feels
It
really
is kind of a
important.
version of trauma in a sense. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really important for people to realize that it's not just, oh, well, somebody died and we need to get over it. Like, we need to be wherever we are.
And it is so much bigger than death. Like, that's the other thing I think we really need to understand is grief is associated with all change. There's so much grief in going through a healthy pregnancy and having a healthy birthing experience, even if it's a little different than what we dreamed of, and becoming a mother or a parent. And like, even with things going quote unquote well or as expected, there can be so much grief. And then even with that word expected, there is so much grief around expectations that we've had about our lives that haven't been met, and dreams we had that are not coming to life. And so grief is not a past thing. It's like often a thing has happened, but we now live without that person for the rest every single day. We now live not realizing this dream we used to have every single day. It's very future based and ongoing.
Yes. No, 100%. I mean, it's ever happening. Like, life keeps moving, and we do tend to find expectations. And gosh, anybody who, we're mostly speaking to mothers here, but the person you were before you became a mom and the person you are never the same, like, period. And that happens every single pregnancy, every single birth. You continually rebirth yourself. And then there's all the other pieces that happen throughout. And it's a constant evolution of who we are. And I think it's a really important what you're saying too, because it almost feels like it can be compounding, right?
Oh,
and it can, right? And so this everything is sort of fine. You're not maybe not, but you think you're fine, and then a bigger thing happens. But it's just the straw that broke everything. Because last year, yes, I lost my mom. A month after that, my last marriage ended, and it was just one thing after the other. And then I had to, move my other kids' school. I had to do this. And so then it's just like, and then I'm sitting here going, and now I'm not doing all the things I said I wanted to do, right? So back to the dreams and the other pieces, which further isolates. And so it's just like one more thing.
And increase the shame and the judgment on ourselves. But that is, it's so interesting that you describe that, because I have so many clients that find me who reach out because someone died. But then we spend
that's the big thing.
Right. That's the thing that's like, I need a grief person, right? But actually what we talk about the whole time can be all these other threads, like the personal judgment and fractioning, or the dreams that have been unmet, or ancestral grief is such a huge one, this disconnection with our ancestors, and this lineage of grief and trauma that we have arrived here with, as well as collective sorrows and the sorrows of the world. Some of the language I'm using is coming from someone I consider to be a teacher and huge influence in my life. I do want to name, because a lot of this language and framing is coming from Frances Weller, who speaks about the 5 gates of grief. And those gates, and we've already been talking about most of them, right? But those gates have really expanded my understanding of grief. And so I'll name them here with that hope as well. And I do ask, like, when I basically talk about the gates of grief in every grief ritual and with every client. And I just ask those who have already heard it to listen for something new, because I find that there is something different in ways others share about it always. And there's also something like in who we are who we are today as we listen to it, we're different. So there might be more. So the first gate of grief is everything I love, I will lose or be separated from or will change form. So we've definitely already talked about this. The second gate of grief, which you've brought up so beautifully, is the parts of myself that have not known love, shame and judgment, and like, where have I fractured and put this away, not wanting anyone to see it. The third gate of grief is the collective sorrows, the sorrows of the world, the collective grief, right? How do we be citizens? Of the world? How do we know what's going on and let our hearts break deeply instead of avoid? I mean, there's a balance, right? How do we let ourselves break about what is happening, and feel deeply while we also are tending our own personal grief? And so that's a big one. The fourth one is like the one that I feel like I'm working with the most in my personal life, but also in my client work, which is the grief connected to what we expected and did not receive in our marriage, in our jobs, in our religion, in our whatever it might be, right? So that one's huge. And then the last one is ancestral grief. And I find that, so this kind of framework can help really widen our understanding. And for me, I started to just really notice, like I was seeing people coming in and people navigating anxiety, depression, addiction so much. And I was just feeling like there's untended grief here so often.
Yeah.
And so it's also helped to have a different perspective towards some of those very common human experiences as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good way to look at it because it's much more layered and it all adds up. The catalyst can be somebody died, but it's all that is triggering all these other places you've been holding on to all of it. And you almost like can't move through that event without pulling at everything else.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's different ways. I'm just thinking about how do we support our people who are grieving? Because that's another huge anxiety, right? Like a lot of don't know what to say or do when someone they love is grieving. And so often they might back away or say nothing or not reach out of fear or anxiety, even though they want to be there. And so really helping ourselves talk about that and think about that. So commonly grievers have said, like, I want to be able to tell stories about my person. I want someone to call me and ask about her or ask about that one story or share with me stories that they remember. Or like I've heard grievers reflect on, like, it was the most meaningful to me when someone showed up, someone I love showed up and they said, I have no idea what to say. And so I feel clumsy being here, but I'm here and I can just be silent with you. I can just go on a walk with you. I'm here for you. I love you. And there's nothing to say. And so
I know. I don't like that I'm sorry because I'm not sorry.
Yeah.
Right. She made her choice and I honored that. And I wanted that for her. I'm not sorry.
Have you had any examples? Have you had any ways people have showed up to you that felt really good?
So I really didn't like the I'm sorry's. I didn't like when I had some of her friends want to show up in their grief in front of her dying body. And I went, no. And I had a hard stop. This is not your space, right? To do that. And you're also bypassing her family by doing that. And so there's this need for respect, especially in the active dying place. But the things that felt good were when people showed up almost like lightheartedly, just there, whether they took care of things or they had a story to tell, or even if it's just kind of a reflection and remembering of a fun time, like acknowledging and not shying away from the feelings of it, but not in this I'm falling apart, pick me up. Because I think that sometimes when all that happens, it's like I can't hold your stuff and my stuff and everything else going on here. But really coming and showing up because they have the space to and wanting to share and to join in more of the like celebration of it and the witnessing of it.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I think like having these conversations and asking each other, even if we're not in active grief, asking a friend, like, when was a time that you remember having been in grief yourself? And what were ways that were really helpful for you to be supported? And thinking about that for ourselves too. So
when we did bury her per her wishes, we actually put her body in the ocean, not embalmed, not anything. She wanted to go back to the water. And so the way you do that is you charter a boat that will take you 3 miles offshore, and you still have to get all the permits. But she had been working with a whole company around wanting to do that herself. So we had those connections. And I remember being on the boat, not knowing some of the people there, and not all of them even knew her, but they were just, tell me about her. Tell me about what kind of person she was. And that kind of, even if they didn't know, they knew not to sit in the, oh, I'm sorry. And if anything, it was like, let's bring up her memory in a way that you're in control of, because somebody might not want that, but it's like an invitation to share some part of that experience, and that felt really good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the memory, right, and the life that she lived, like the loss of life is sad because of many reasons, but because life can be so vibrant and beautiful and great, and
exactly.
So can we, in our remembrance, tap into the beauty and the vibrancy of life and of our people, right? So that is something I work with people on too, is like remembrance rituals. Like, can we plan a party, and maybe it's not a many people party, maybe it's like a 3-person party that taps into some of the things that she most loved, or that really were her values, or whatever it might be.
Yes, exactly. And, she, at some point I will publish her story, because it was something she never got to do. And I asked her when she was dying if it was okay that I continued that. And so there's like a going through and remembering and sharing her story through her words and things like that. That's a really, it's a happy memory. It doesn't mean it doesn't bring tears and other emotions, but it's another way to stay connected. And, sometimes that's continuing other work that they've done in honor, and various ways that we can like continue that legacy in a different way.
Yeah. The legacy, and so many pieces to be threading that into our life, especially in the case of losing a parent and being a parent.
Right. Like in some ways I'm her legacy too, right? As her daughter and my children, and sharing all of that as well. But, she was actually a therapist. And some ways we were each other's biggest teachers, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And so just thinking for our audience members and folks listening who, being in the space of losing parents or also being parents, and some of this legacy can come through, how we now parent. It comes through how we live. It comes through how we play, how we celebrate, also how we grieve, all of these pieces. And just thinking as parents as well, how do we talk to our kids about death and grief and let them have their experience and their feelings with it? I've been really lucky in bringing my daughter with me to grief rituals since she was like 7 weeks old. And it's been amazing. I mean, when she was that little and having her on my body, it was really amazing to feel how calm she was in the big waves, in the drumming and the dancing and the raging and the weeping and the crying. Like, she slept. And when she would occasionally, there would be a very big sound, and she would like open her eyes and look around and be like, okay, are we safe? Yep, and fall right back to sleep. And just, I really hope for these next generations coming that they can grow up witnessing adults engaging in and expressing big emotion in ways that can be safely held and integrated, because it's not, we really are sick and can make ourselves more sick by trying to keep doing it in silence and trying to not feel it. And so I feel very passionate about how do we bring kids into the picture with us, and how do we do this in a different way together, integrated.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to say. I want to share my sister. Her oldest child is 5 right now, but was 4 last year, and she was very worried about what am I going to tell my daughter about grandma passing. And when she told her that grandma was sick and probably and dying, her 4-year-old's response was actually to get excited, and she didn't have any preconceived ideas about what death meant. It was more this like, oh, she's going to be a mermaid. That's so exciting for her. And just like, and her daughter's very clairvoyant and has talked about their pets that have passed. And what do you mean? They're right here. What are you talking about? Like, and so there was almost like, oh, she's gonna complain as me more. Like, there was this totally different feeling and knowing that sometimes young kids have, and so we can project the wrongness of it on them, or we can be curious with them and feel all of the things. Even saying I'm sad, but they're not even. It's not bad sad. It's just being present with it, and just as they get sad. I always say that kids, when we watch them and the way that they express their emotions, they're so present. Things are when they're a big deal, they're a big deal right now, and it is all encompassing. But they feel it, and then they let it pass through.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and even 90 seconds later, a couple minutes later, and it's moved, but they felt it in its intensity and its entirety. And often we say, don't do that, or you can't feel that big. It's not okay. And that's where we start to teach ourselves to stop feeling instead of going back to what we did as kids. And things were happy and excited and as big as they were, as well as sad and hard and challenging and frustrating, as big as they are. And then we move through, and we're so much more present.
Well, and that big expression that we did as kids, but also so many other cultures do and make space for grief in this way, where there is a coming together. There is a circle formed in the street. There is an invitation to be in the center of that circle when grief is moving through you, and to say and sound everything, and to just have the group of people around you validate and say yes and cheer, like be with you in your expression of it. And then you rejoin the circle, you rejoin the village, and you're not held accountable for like, well, you said those things when you were in the heat of grief. And so I don't know, it's not understood that way. It's about this big emotion or this spirit and this energy that has to move through and out of us. So I'm really glad that you pointed towards children and the way children are with this and the wisdom of that, because I'm looking so often at other cultures and their wisdom in that, and it's both. Like, we definitely see it in both. And so inviting all of us to explore what that can look like for us as adults.
Right? When your child says, I hate you, they don't mean it. They just needed to move that big emotion. Right? We don't sit there and go, oh, you told me you hated me. Okay, I'm not feeding you anymore. Like, that's not what we do. We go, oh, it's okay because they're kids. What? Like, no, it's okay because it was an emotion that needed to move. And the same is true for us. We need to be present and more graceful with ourselves, and acknowledge that actually they got it more figured out than we do.
Absolutely.
And the more we can go back to that, really the better overall for so many things.
Yeah.
So many things. Well, this has been a really amazing conversation. I know for me personally, I know I got a little emotional, but that's what happens when we start talking about grief, I'm sure.
Totally.
But I would love for you to share with our listeners where they can find you, and if there's anything you want to share with somebody who's in the middle of it right now, really, what where they can get support.
Well, first of all, and it was actually something we opened with, is grace. Grace for yourself, grace for your people around you who are grieving. It's going to look different and feel different and be dynamic and complex. And I just don't really feel like there's actual, like, we're never going backwards. People are often like, I think I'm going backwards. We're not going backwards. We're moving, and keep moving, and just grace and space and compassion and curiosity for yourself, and remembering that our grieving is a continued expression of our love and our longing. It is it's really important work, and it is lifelong work, and your relationship with grief is a long relationship. So it requires, I would say, our participation. It requires our engagement. Like, what could that look like and mean for you, right? So grace, and then exploring what it is that we want and need, asking, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Can you hold space for me in this way? Or can you share a story? Or so try in small ways if you can. And reaching out if you have people that are grieving in your life that you aren't reaching out to because you're nervous about it. Exploring that of like, is there something you can say that is true, that honors what's happening for you and your own kind of anxiety around it, while also helping them know that you are present and you are there for them. So those are a few thoughts. As far as reaching me, my website and my business is called Alyssa Rose Healing Arts. So alyssarosehealingarts.com. I post a lot on Instagram about upcoming gatherings and writings as well. Alyssa Rose Healing on Instagram. I have a Substack and newsletter. The newsletter is a great place to stay informed. And I do consultations with people up front if you're like, hey, I don't really know what I need or want, that we can hop on a call and figure that out together too.
Awesome. Amazing. Well,
Thanks for having
really
me.
deeply, I so appreciate your wisdom and the space that you're holding. And, as somebody in the midst of it, it is very, very important. So very much appreciate you.
You too.
Thank you so much. And for all of our listeners, I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us on Awakened Motherhood. I hope today's episode inspired you and offered support for your journey. Remember, your story has the power to ignite change, and your resilience is a testament to your strength as a mother. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Share it with other mothers who might benefit from our stories of empowerment and healing. I invite you to connect with me on social media platforms at Amanda Quick Healing, or visit my website, amandaquickhealing.com, for more information on other ways to work with me. Until next time, keep embracing your divine self and discovering your warrior mama within. Thank you for being part of Awakened Motherhood, where your story is the spark for change.